Warning, the Rise from the Ashes Recovery podcast contains adult subject matter and may be triggering to some individuals. This podcast is meant for entertainment purposes only and should never be substituted for any official clinical or medical advice. Enjoy the show. All right, Ronnie, thank you very much for joining me. So you're still in Tehachapi at the moment, right? How is it up there? It's been a while.
It's interesting. It's growing. It's getting a lot bigger. And there's still lack of resources with the growth that we have experienced. But being here still for me is a blessing. I'm glad to still be here and be a part of the things that I bring to the community here.
For those of you who are listening, so Tehachapi is this little small town up by Bakersfield that no one's ever heard of. I say up by Bakersfield, people assume it is Bakersfield. It is not. It is a small town. You would only know of Tehachapi for three reasons: either the windmills, the prison, or Woodward West Skate Park. I don't think the cement plant would necessarily go in there. So, it's kind of interesting growing up in a small town and then getting sober. So let's kind of jump right into it. How much time do we got? Drug of choice? Give me a quick overview of the using history.
All right. So my story is a little rocky. I started my recovery journey July 13th of 2009. I had 9 years clean before my lapse. And I say lapse because it was not an ongoing use. I realized what I did. I was in a raw moment of life. And I just couldn't believe that I made that mistake after 9 years, but it happens. I've learned, instead of living in that stigma that we all get to see of, beating ourselves up about relapsing, I've learned that I needed that lapse to really engage with the fact of who I am today. And so, that stigma always kept me in my substance abuse and my recovering out loud, if you will, kind of quiet, because I live in a small town. The support is not like what you would think. Yes, there's 12 step. Yes, there's AA. But when you grow up in a town where you're known as the drug addict, the teen mom, the one that just isn't going to get their shit together pretty much, it's very hard to reach out in that community of support. And so I kind of had to create my own. My drug of choice, was meth.
That was mine too.
Meth was always, I didn't like downers. I had enough of that going on in my life at the time. And that's why I used meth, just to get away, and I would have to say now I have, since my last lapse, I have almost 7 years. And that's been a challenge. That is even working in substance abuse, even having the tools, knowing how to manage my own emotions. We're still human, and each day is a different roller coaster, especially with the things that we've had go on in the midst of me even finding what sobriety looked like. Because to me, there's a lot more to sobriety than just recovery from a drug, right?
Absolutely.
Or substance. There's a lot that people have to recover from in order to even get to the substance. It's kind of like, what happened first, the egg or the chicken, right? And so for me, going into school and focusing on my kids and really just not worrying about what outside influence had to say, that was a huge thing to keeping me sober through the challenges that my family faced.
And, when you mentioned stigma, it's interesting too, because working with clients, at least in big areas, right? When they talk about the topic of stigma, yes, there's of course stigma within the family based on all the damage we've done, things of that nature. But I've always found that stigma has always been, when you live in a large area, has been more of a macro concern, as far as there is stigma socioculturally, right? As when you boil down to the micro that the individual experiences, yes, within their immediate family, but generally speaking, when they walk out the door, it's not like that. Now, in a small town, on the other hand, where, and I would argue that this is the same thing with recovery programs, to where in a perfect world, these programs are supposed to be anonymous. You go to these things, nobody says anything, and it stays there as much as it can because they're so people. But
that's a big problem, especially for us trying to get into any kind of supportive programs in a small town. It's supposed to be. It's the same way in IOP. When I was working in an IOP clinic here, it happened quite frequently where we would have, group members go out of group, make a discussion, and cause a lot of harm for the other client. And then before you know it, everything's going around the A hall, the NA hall, the church, the school, the teachers, the banks. And it's real. It's absolutely real. And then when you're surrounded by that, the reality of really trying to find hope is almost damn near impossible.
Absolutely. And now I'm not sure what it's like up there, in the Tehachapi area or Kern County or whatever, but I know down here in Rehab Riviera, there's kind of this known, okay, you got to get sober. You got to leave where you're at. You have to go to this far away place. You have to do that. And in a perfect world, relocate there And that's not always the case for some people. When you were getting started, how did you get those first 9 years? Let's start there.
So I'm adopted. And, the scare of not being present with my son when he was the only blood that at the time that I had was terrifying. It was really like, in a way, an unhealthy thing in codependency, if I can be honest. It was proving to others that I am good enough, proving it wasn't myself. And that's why I say that even though the first 9 years of my sobriety, I was sober, but I was definitely not. And I was sober off of meth, which I was, implementing other addictive behaviors in place of it. Right. But I was not in recovery. I wasn't doing it for myself. I wasn't doing it for my purpose, my meaning of, my value. It was more of, if I don't do this, they're going to take my kid and they're going to be on it, and they know everything because I was a teen mom and they were right and I was wrong. And I couldn't sit with that. I couldn't sit with that with the surrounding issues that were going on. There was a lot of, again, it's easy to point the finger at somebody when they're an addict, but God forbid you look in the mirror. And at that time, I had a lot of people pointing the finger at me that were doing the same thing that I was. And it just didn't set well with me. I could not sit and see people telling me I'm not able to do something while they're doing the same thing. And so I used that for motivation, and I went to church and I got a second chance as being a mom. And when that happened with my second son, I didn't want anybody to ever have that power and control over me again. And so I took that as a second chance. And although I took it as a second chance with meth, definitely again was not truly in recovery until, I'm going to say, the last 5 years of my life.
Now, from the bird's eye view, to put it as simply as like the courts are on my back, this is what I wanted to have my blood, wanted to kind of say fuck you to everybody, especially you working in the industry, right? You had to have heard that a million times about for my kid, for the courts, for whatever. So to acquire 9 years, you have to have been doing something right. What do you think were those things? Was it the church? Was it the community? Was it
the
the
community
therapist?
at the time that I had in the church? Absolutely.
Okay.
And the fight to get my older son back, and just that willingness to not give up, and the strength to want to do better. But what I can say that in the last 5 years, what has taught me recovery, was the loss of my son's dad, and that really pushed me to knowing, okay, I'm sober, but how am I managing my emotions? How am I managing codependent relationship? We can get sober, but the trauma that comes with our addiction takes years to overcome. Like, we can get sober and be sober for a year and still fight for 12 years to get our body to understand, hey, we don't need that substance. Hey, you're having a moment where your head's talking to you and it's not realistic. That's just your head talking. It takes so much time. Even still to this day, I have to practice just mindfulness, redirection, self-care, because to get in that negative headspace is so easy and it will swallow you alive, especially in a small town.
So let me ask you a question on the topic of stigma, right? Using the word addict, using the word alcoholic when it comes to us and our identifications, right? I have always had the opinion, functionally, for me as an individual in recovery, it is a title that is not as stigmatizing as it sounds from the outside, because like you said, there's this thing that my mind does where if I'm not paying attention, if I'm not doing the work that I need to, it gets very convincing very, very quickly. It tells me a lot of funny, interesting stories. It's convincing. It's something that many people in recovery say never quite goes away. What is your view on that topic of somebody calling themselves an addict and an alcoholic?
So I do not believe our diagnosis is what defines us. I do not believe that, if you are an alcoholic, then own that you're an alcoholic and know that you cannot have a drink, right? But don't forever beat yourself up with, well, I'm an addict, I'm an alcoholic, and I'm a terrible person, and this is just who I am. No, I don't think that we should identify to being stuck with a label like that. I think that struggling with substance abuse issues, struggling with alcoholism, because at the end of the day, I'm Ronnie. I'm not a meth addict. I'm Ronnie. My traumas are what led me to becoming a meth addict. And the hurt is what caused me to the terrible darknesses that I've been in. And so I do understand why some people do that, though. I do understand why people are so strong in that identity. So, I guess I could respect it either way, honestly.
Well, you use the words diagnosis. Now I got to put on my clinician hat for a minute, to where when we talk about we are not our diagnosis, when you talk about DSM criteria, things of that nature, somebody can have a substance use disorder and be in remission, I believe it's 6 months post-use. It might be a year. I don't remember exactly. So when you talk about your diagnosis, that changes really quickly. Now, living with this thing, I might not qualify for the diagnosis anymore, but it is a thing that I have. Call it whatever you like. Call it a disease, call it a condition, call it a plight, affliction. So when we talk about this identity, I guess, to your point, right? I guess it's the manner in which you use it, right? Is it functional, or is it limiting beliefs and limiting yourself and your growth?
I think it can be limiting because and again, my opinions are my opinions. Everybody's, facts can be different. But I think if we limit ourselves to just this box of what we think we are, then we're not able to grow out of the box, and so being mindful of, hey, what, there's a floor to the box, right? The floor is always going to be there. Mm-hmm. The walls can come down so that things can newly develop within yourself. And so I think it's empowering to challenge yourself to not stay stuck in that identity and grow as who you are as an individual, because again, you were an individual prior to any kind of substance use. And that's important to remember.
Absolutely. It is. Absolutely. And addiction absolutely dehumanizes us in many different ways, whether that be by the things we need to do to keep doing our substance, when it comes to the things that we are forced to do or people that we are forced to be around as consequences continue to pile up. Obviously, socioculturally, being an addict is not something that is looked favorably upon unless you are a rich, musician playing music and writing songs.
The discrimination is real because, addiction does not discriminate. No. There's judges that deal with substance use issues. And substance use issues aren't even the only dynamic to addiction. When you're spending your money and you can't feed your kids, hey, you might be gambling and that might be a problem too. There's so many other things that can be affected by choices and the need of recovery in certain areas other than just that substance.
Now, this might be a little intrusive and you can tell me to fuck off if you would like, but you were mentioning about other behaviors coming in when the substance had been removed that we might call either problem behaviors, cross addiction, whatever it is. What were some of the things that came up when the substance had been removed?
For myself?
Yes.
A lot of anger because I gave up that need to control, right? I was willingly allowing myself to be vulnerable and not need to have that power and control in my life anymore. And I've been doing that since I was 15 and a half, 16 years old when I got pregnant with my son. So I became very angry and confused, and my nervous system, trying to reprogram that fight or flight is a real thing, especially when you've been in defense mode since you were a child, and so anger, holding resentment seemed to be a little easier when it came to the anger. Men, poor choices with men, domestic violence, that's real. That was kind of like a trade for trade right there for me. Lack of really healthy, like any kind of healthy relationship. It took me some time to really know what communication looked like, healthy communication, rekindling relationships that were healthy, knowing how to set boundaries. I did not know how to set boundaries at all. So a lot of just internal reset, if you will. So, and then I went to cocaine for a little bit. I thought, hey, it's not meth. Everyone's doing it. It's fine.
Oh, yeah. I did that too.
No. I was blessed to never really have a problem with alcohol. But here's the problem with alcohol for me is that it turns off that part of my brain that gives a shit whenever I drink too much. And so that's where I led to my lapse. That's when my lapse happened was I had been drinking significantly, got in my head. And before I know it, I'm in the bathroom at a local bar doing a line of coke.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it wasn't a lapse, so technically it'll be almost 15 years in July off of meth completely. So my lapse is considered a lapse because I mentally allowed myself to go there, but I used cocaine.
Right.
So that was so cocaine, men, domestic violence, all that, codependency, all that good stuff came.
I want to kind of deviate because I know a lot of the people that we have on here are very, how do I put this nicely, rigid when it comes to certain belief systems regarding abstinence, complete sobriety, things of that nature. That's a whole other conversation. For you, and I may be mishearing this, but if I'm hearing you correctly, is relapse or lapse to you regarding the specific substance of methamphetamine, cocaine, and then because drinking wasn't a problem, that is a substance that is not considered in the wheelhouse, or am I inferring too much?
No. I don't drink anymore because of my autoimmune. And that was just something I recently chose to not do. I've never been like somebody that goes out to the bar all the time or have a drink at home and abuse or go whenever I'm in a mental space of just not okay. I don't just go, hey, I need a beer. Right. But it's still just not something that I can do with my health. And it's the same way with opiate medications. I've had 2 spine surgeries. I was in a wheelchair for 2.5 years. I almost died. And opiate medication was my next crutch, right? That was the next thing they gave me. And they were like, oh, and in my head, in my addict mindset, I'm like, well, the doctors are giving it to me. I'll be okay. No, I was still in my head, not in recovery yet, right? Because it's been almost 8 years since my spine injury. I wasn't in recovery. So I used any excuse, as us addicts do, to be like, oh, I could use this, I could use that. So no, like I have to be very strict with myself. A lapse for me is dropping the ball mentally for myself, if that makes sense. So like a lapse for me is when I'm choosing to avoid something by going to a substance. That's my personal input on it for myself.
And it's okay. And the reason why I wanted to clarify is because one of the common things in recovery is the black and white abstinence is abstinence, right? There are some gray areas when you talk about, surgeries, doctor prescribed, those types of things. But from the black and white, abstinence is abstinence. Things like alcohol, things like basically any mind altering substance that is not immediately prescribed by a physician for a medical reason is considered to be a quote unquote relapse. And then that's why I asked, you might have heard this term, but people say like Cali sober as an example, where they are actively smoking weed, but they are not using their drug of choice. And if I'm hearing you correctly, for you, I don't want to put you into a box, but it sounds like your framework is, here are the things that are not good for me. Recovery is more than just the substance going into my body. It is a state of being. And that for me is what constitutes a lapse, is that the substance is typically a part of that lapse in being, if you will. But that's what they go together. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because, you and I kind of discussed the harm reduction approach when it comes to Cali Sober, MAT services, those things. I am a substance abuse counselor. And if a substance, whatever the substance may be, is what's causing the issue, then obviously that's, what we're going to work on. But there's some people who are coming off of fentanyl or heroin and they can't take MAT services because they abuse them. Suboxone is just something they've learned to get higher on. So then they go and they transition over to smoking medicinal marijuana. Hey, are you off the fentanyl? Are you off the heroin? Hell yeah, you are. Do what you got to do to keep yourself alive and find what navigates you and helps you. Now, if you go from fentanyl to heroin and you're spending all your money on pot, you're not paying your bills, your kids ain't getting to school, that's a problem. That's addiction. That's absolutely. That's addiction. Not, do you see what I'm saying? So it could be,
of course,
a mom in the morning who's waking up and she has to have her bang. She just got to get that bang. Her kids are going to be late. You got a problem. Your kids are going to be late. Why are you worried about an energy drink prior to getting your children to school? That could be literally any scenario, right? And that's just the way that I look at it personally.
And this, I think, has to do with me working with clients to where I feel like there's a line when you talk about, I'll use specifically weed as a topic, right? There's a line here between, okay, harm reduction, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to smoke weed so I don't do fentanyl. And this is what I'm doing to keep myself alive, versus, hey, actually, I just want to keep getting high, period. And this is the only way that I can do it. And the thing that makes me nervous when it comes to weed, and as somebody who loved weed, it hurts my soul even saying this, the weed of today, if you have any kind of proclivity for mental health concerns of any kind, bipolar 1, schizophrenia, schizoaffective, any of those things, it does real damage to people. And as you and I both know, mental health is a component, and cool, I'm not doing fentanyl, but if I have that tendency and that chemistry that now I'm in psychosis, it's a gamble to go that route.
Absolutely. And I 100% agree.
I want to fast forward a little bit. So you had the 9 years, you had the lapse to where it was a combination of a lapse in being and that accompanied the substance. So if I'm hearing you correctly, this was a one night situation to where the next day did we go, okay, hey, look, crap, you just did it, back on the ball? Or what was that process like for you to get back on the wagon per se?
Yes. But I also knew where I was at. Was a very unsafe place. And if I could be 100% honest with you, my relapse happened literally 2 days prior to my spine injury. So I had a relapse and boom, I'm in the hospital and I can't walk and I can't feel my legs and I'm not going to be able to, at one point I was in quad akina state, which is where you have 72 hours or you are going to die. I was there for 48 hours. And so when I came out, I'm in the hospital. I'm feeling like shit. I'm being told I'm never going to walk again. I'm not going to feel anything from the legs down. I literally felt like God just smacked me in the face. Like, are you kidding me? This is literally what you get. This is literally what I told myself, like, this is what you get for being so weak. And it was horrible. It was a horrible mindset to be in. And I should have never allowed myself to be so unkind to myself, because I allowed myself to be in cycles of domestic violence. Even after my injury, even after I got out of the hospital, I went back to the same person that had a part of putting me there. And I was just very hard on myself. And it took me really navigating self-worth quickly, very quickly, and reaching out to some support from my parents at the time. And they got me out, and it was not an option again. It scared the shit out of me, Brian. Because, when you go from thriving, having kids, doing your thing, you think you're doing it right when you're not. And then out of nowhere, you potentially almost lose your life over something like that. It's a real eye opener. And then to lose the person that was your best friend since you were 13 years old, regardless of what people say, we had a child when we were young. We had a lot of ups and downs in co-parenting. We had a lot of ups and downs with our families. But when I lost him, that was just the final straw for me. It felt like another thing, because I was so close. When everything was going on right before my son's dad passed away, I was just really struggling. And what I've came to understand now about myself is that there's nothing wrong with having a therapist on board. And
Absolutely.
even in the good times when I'm having a great week and I don't have much to check in on, I'm still there, and I'm still checking in to hold myself accountable. And I'm hoping one day that I don't have to be there. But as of right now, I am in acceptance that that's just where I'm at.
And I'm right there with you when it comes to having a therapist. For me in sobriety, that was something, and I've talked about this on other episodes, I came in with a very, very, very large bias against therapists in general. That's a whole nother conversation. Now, down the line, after a lot of work, I'm right there with you. I would contend that individual therapists and their effectiveness of treating addiction and alcoholism as a thing by itself, that's a whole nother conversation. But the connection, the fact that when therapists aren't there to just be putting out the fire, sometimes you just need to have somebody in your life, period, that knows what's going on with you, for better or for worse, and actually gives a shit and just wants the best for you.
And I think the consistency is a huge part to that key, right? Like having that consistent person, especially for those of us that might have had relationships that weren't, even ones that were supposed to be healthy, right? Like we talk a lot about the trauma that leads to addiction. I did not have a very easy upbringing, not that my parents weren't good to me. That's another story for another time. But, I had a lot of these things, abandonment issues from being adopted, being an only child, having older parents, all these things. And so it's like knowing that you have somebody there, and the relationship with my parents wasn't that great, right? And then neither was it with my son's father. And so it was like, I had a wall up of trust, and to have that non-biased other party able to come in and even call me out when I need to be called out and be like, you're not thinking realistically. It sounds like your PTSD is talking rather than the reality right now. Bring it back, Ronnie. And so to have that accountability for myself is huge, because I need that. I need that, because if I get beat up for it, then I get in my own negative headspace and that redirection. I've really figured it out. I feel like I've really got a good grasp on those negative headspaces in the last, like I said, about 3 years, honestly, for that. But a lot of in-depth EDMR therapy, a lot of talk therapy, couple sessions a week, to realize that I don't have to live in the things that I've been through, that I can move forward without holding resentment towards myself.
Yeah, 100%. So when you talk about people calling you out, using your words, right? It sounds like, if I'm hearing you correctly, that we didn't do any kind of a formal 12-step program, or normally that would be the sponsor, as an example. That is that person, right? Who is that person for you that had the either permission or authority or rapport to be able to step into that space to say, Ronnie, your head's fucking with you again. Like, lock it up.
My therapist. I didn't have a sponsor. I didn't, I was a very isolated user, if that makes sense. I know everybody knew I was a tweaker, whatever, but I wasn't out loud about it, right? Like I didn't go and share my struggles with people like I should have. And so my therapist, I've been working with her for many years on and off. Actually, I've been very blessed to stay in contact with her, for almost 10 years, honestly. We've been working together. And so she's really done well at holding me accountable, and she knows me. And also just my faith, I don't have that whole rehab 12-step testimony. I don't know why I've been so blessed to have the strength that I do, the mind, will, the power that I have. But definitely at the times that I need it is my therapist, and now my husband. my husband is, anytime, like, the other day I was struggling and he was just like, you seem overwhelmed. I said, I am overwhelmed. I am struggling. And he was there. He was present. And that's all that anybody can really do, is just be present for somebody that needs to listen.
The reason why I bring it up, and I know you said that, you didn't have that 12-step upbringing or that 12-step kind of a program. And the connotation you said it sounded like that was almost a negative thing. And I would contend that I think we've been conditioned a little bit at this point to where there's a specific framework in which it needs to occur. And not everybody's life circumstances allow that to happen. I mean, if there's one thing that I really would try to beat into clients here in Rehab Riviera when they would come down, when they were talking about, oh, no, I need to have an IOP and I need to have this and I need to have this. And it's like, dude, there are people out there getting this thing with none of that.
Right.
Like, you can do it. It's the important elements that are addressed are the big thing. So the fact that you had a therapist that's willing to step into that role is few and far between. We had a guy on here who his whole thing is being a supervisor for training therapists, associate level therapists in treatment centers. And we had a whole conversation about balancing the whole, lived experience versus clinical approach. I told him, I said, one of my frustrations when I was up and coming was I'd have this therapist that be like, well, we didn't get there. And, I didn't really want to step in to say anything because they're so scared to jar them. So for you to have a therapist that would be willing to step into that space is impressive.
Yeah, she's amazing. She's amazing. And she's faith-based as well. And so that has helped us a lot and helped me a lot with just many different avenues of learning how to respond rather than react, and the guidance and just the openness to staying consistent with me too. That's huge. But there wasn't a lot of different options up here, if I can be honest. Cornerstone, the clinic I worked for about 3 years. We were the first IOP program here in Tehachapi. There's not much here. We have a little county ran office and the counselors and therapists there are great, but the demand is so high.
Yep.
And they don't get, Cornerstone was a faith-based program. It was more of a therapeutic community. Whereas, the county programs are not, doing a Bible study on a Wednesday night, really getting to know where these people are at, really getting to help them meet them out where they're at, not be unrealistic with the expectation of this is what the book says and this is what we got to figure out. And that's why I like working in the dynamic that I do. I'm not a clinician. I am a counselor and I'm a peer-to-peer support counselor in substance abuse. I'm also a case manager and I'm a behavioral specialist through the judicial programs. And so I really get to see some raw shit. But I tell you what,
I have no doubt.
That's where I love to be. I just love it because I get to see where they're at. And I get to help guide with education and psychoeducation by also being empathetic in the way that I can. And having that relationship dynamic is super important for people that are healing and recovering from life.
Is there a connection to these are my people? And that's part of the reason why we feel so passionate about working with that specific demographic?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Those are my people. We've all been there. And just like I said, after my recovery and my sobriety, I got angry, right? And that's what I specialize in, is anger management and domestic violence, because I get it. I understand. It's not that easy to just, put the stop sign up. Your emotions are at yellow now. No, why do we get there? Why are we worried about caretaking to the point of not walking away? What led to the circumstances to why you allowed your fuse to blow? There's so much bigger to the picture, and you're a human being who's allowed to have feelings, that's allowed to make mistakes and remember that tomorrow's a new day and you are always able to challenge yourself for growth and change. And you're the one that can make it happen. People on the sidelines there to support, clinicians, counselors, behavioral specialists, paralegals, public defenders, we're all here. But at the end of the day, the people that step one foot in front of the other, they're the ones doing the work. And to see them do that, it's just inspiring for me. The reunification process I get to be a part of, from seeing these people that just go from so broken, so lost, so confused, a system they don't understand, a system they shouldn't have to understand, questions they never get answered, support they don't get through that, and to be a part of that and see them at the end reunify with their children, obtain over a year of sobriety, manage those emotions the best they can, self-regulate that anger. And at the end of my classes, I really can say I'm blessed to see a majority of that change. And that's a beautiful thing. And I'm honored to be the person that someone's willing to trust, to listen to guide them and navigate through that, because it's raw. The court programs are raw. Some people are there because they absolutely should be. And then there's other people that you're like, what? How did this happen? And why are you here today? This does not make sense, but it sounds like the state needs some money. So, okay. Like it's a raw reality, but it's a blessing to be a part of these people's lives every week. Show up for them, give them the best support I can. And at the end of the day, know that I've done what I can with that energy, because that's why I do what I do now. I've been the victim, I've been the addict, I've been the abuser, I've been the I've been all of it. And so to be able to put all that pain into purpose, that's just healing for me. Some would call it a workaholic, but I'm sinking. Hold on.
I'm right there with you. So I get it.
Yeah. So, I mean.
For you, clinically, there's a big thing about do not self-disclose. However, in the recovery community, self-disclosure is one of the key things that people use to connect, to be able to transmit to somebody saying, hey, I've been there. I know what it's like. There is hope, etc. Where do you stand on that topic in your profession on the topic of self-disclosure?
I don't rip from a wound that's not healed. So when I started working as a counselor in substance abuse, I was very fresh when my son's father passed away. And so if it was somebody that was coming in, that was a mother with a family that I just felt like was going to be too close, I would put boundaries down with myself and I would let administration know, hey, you know what, this is just not something I can work with as of now until I'm there. And, and 2.5 years later, I was able to finally, after, like I said, EDMR therapy, really knowing how to channel my emotions so that when I'm with my clients, if I'm going to reflect what's going on, how I can relate to that, right? I want to make sure I'm not bleeding my wound onto them. I want to make sure that I'm able to stand and say, hey, this is what happened, but this is what can come from it, and confidence, right? And so I personally have had much better experience from sharing somewhat from my experience, right? And so people appreciate that. And to my knowledge, I've gotten a lot further with my clients. They've been willing to do a lot more work or go into a lot more depth of things with me because they don't think I'm just book smart. They understand that I've been through it. I know it. And they see that I not necessarily conquered, but you get what I'm saying? Like, they see that I'm at where I'm at in the position in my life, and they can respect the advice I give them, knowing that one day I was at the bottom as well.
Yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the head, provided that you're not bleeding all over somebody. If I'm hearing you correctly, it's appropriate to be able to help constructively self-disclose when it would serve a good purpose. Absolutely. In order to communicate compassion, hope, healing, skills, etc.
Absolutely.
Here's where I want to kind of use your experience and have you help me kind of define some things. So from your experience, your particular recovery framework is saying, here is this mode of being that is, I would consider to be addict behavior or alcoholic behavior. And accompanying with that is a substance. Of course, abstain from that particular said substance, and to strive to be in recovery as a being. So that would be mentally, emotionally, spiritually, if that's your cup of tea. Let's say take a 12-step environment, right? There is a clearly defined, no pun intended, step-by-step process. It's all kind of clearly defined in this box.
Okay. So
it's like if somebody was using your framework, how would they start?
Okay. So if somebody was using my framework, the first thing I would say is, starting by learning what your own identity is. Learn on yourself. What does self-love look like for you? What does it look like to forgive yourself? Not hold resentment with yourself. Knowing that it's okay for yourself to reach out for support, whatever that might look like for you, whether it's 12-step, whether it's online recovery support, because there is a lot of that, whether it's going into a program, whether it's reaching out to some form of faith-based practice, whatever works for you, let it work for you, and don't let the stigma behind all of everybody else's will work for them, what they think is right, identify to what you need to do. Do what works best for you. Be patient with yourself through the process because it does not happen overnight. It is something that takes years and years and years to learn how to juggle because it's never going to be fully managed. Work on self-forgiveness. Like I said, being kind to yourself is a really hard thing. Forgiving yourself for the things that were out of your control that you hold onto. Finding some kind of support in some fashion, being true to yourself and knowing that if you fall down, it is okay. There's a saying that goes like this: pull yourself up by the bootstraps. That's an impossible task. Has anybody ever really tried to do that? And if you do, you're going to face first onto the ground, right? You don't have to pull yourself up by the bootstraps. You pull yourself up the way that you can at a pace that is comfortable for you, realistic for you, and don't expect that validation from anybody but yourself. Focus on knowing that Yeah, validation from others is super important. But once you can validate yourself, the other things come a little bit easier to accept. Other people are always going to have something to say, whether it's a negative or a positive. Try to just stick to what you know is your fact, not other people's opinions.
One of the cliches that you hear people say is that this is something that we don't do alone, right? Do you believe that this is something that, using the framework that you described, is something that would be highly encouraged, or is this something that somebody can do on their own?
So I say that all the time, right? As a substance abuse counselor, that's actually something that I do. I literally walk with the clients. Like that's one of the things that I do as me and my identity as a counselor. If we need to walk it off, we're going to walk it off. So walking alone is never fun, right? I mean, when you walk alone, you get stuck in your head, or you can take that time to reflect on things. So it really just depends on the person, right? But I don't think anybody ever deserves to walk alone. We're human. We're not meant to be alone. We're meant to be herders. We're meant to be together. We're meant to come and unite as one together. And I don't believe that anybody deserves to be alone, because I believe that because I isolated myself the way that I did, it prevented me from having a longer term in my sobriety and not having that lapse. And if I had that support, I would have learned my self-worth a long time ago, rather than trying to navigate it through myself and my own filtering system in my head.
We absolutely do not deserve to walk alone. I think we as a human species are designed to we're social animals, right? And I guess I'm more asking it from a context of not necessarily should we be alone as much as it is, and I know you've had to encounter these types of people in your professional life. I don't need anybody. I got this. I don't need help. I don't need anything. So it's not so much about like, do you deserve to, as much as it is it a wise thing to do?
I don't think so. No, I think that you should be open-minded in that. But that's the stigma that we were talking about at the beginning, right? That stigma gets into people's heads to where, well, I don't want to be known as the addict. I don't want to be, no, not me, especially dependent upon the belief systems and values. And I'm going to say it, the generation, the age, it really depends on that person. You're going to find someone that's a boomer and they're not going to be willing to therapeutic approach. They're going to figure it out on their own, right? But then there's some that if you plant the seed the proper way, they're willing to open that up and be willing to having support, right? And so, like I said, it really just depends on the person. But I do not believe that anybody should go through it alone, because it can be more harmful than it can be good. And you could be working on things a lot longer than you have to.
And I agree with you on that. Regardless of where you stand on the generational thing, whether you subscribe to the therapeutic approach or not, the reality here is that I would argue, regardless of what generation you come from, people who typically have people in their, call it, recovery world, whether that be, good, trusted friends who are good for you, that know what's going on with you, family members, if you are fortunate enough to have them, that are healthy enough to be in alignment with you, having a clinician or something that you can work to deeper explore these things, having all these resources socially available to you beats the hell out of trudging the road alone. And that no matter how much progress you feel like you're making by yourself, at the end of the day, you are making it harder for you.
You are. You absolutely are. And when you allow yourself the opportunity of any kind of group dynamic, whatever that may look like for you, you're allowing yourself to hear you're not alone. And that's huge. When somebody feels validated and they know they're heard, they're seen, they're understood. I mean, the willingness to be better, the willingness to strive to figure it out, even if they don't even know where to start, that willingness is planted and they have a community to see, hey, I'm not going through this by myself. And I can do this because, hey, that guy's doing it. Or, hey, this counselor showed up on this. And that's a huge thing. So being alone through it is definitely not ideal.
When we talk about advice to somebody who's trying to get sober, I want to use your unique experience to, talk about small town stuff. A lot of people go to major metropolitan areas in order to try to get sober, because that's sometimes where the rehabs are. That's sometimes where a lot of resources. It's just the way that it is. But
Right.
Not everybody has that luxury, or maybe they do travel here, but they can't stay here and they're going back home to a said small town. What would be your advice to them?
I would definitely look into what options are available for you. Like I said, there's a lot of opportunity online. The recovery, we do recover on TikTok and online, is huge. There's a lot of lives that go on with amazing people. I've met people all over the world, Australia, Canada, Africa. Like I've met people from all over the world, and they all get on there and they all support each other, and they have, kind of like group subject topics, but just, peer to peer, friend to friend, no clinical. So, if that's not your thing and you're just looking for somewhere to just feel heard, the AA community's online, the NA community's online, and just researching and advocating for yourself and really looking into if I want to start getting better, how am I going to make this happen? Finding videos online that help you educate yourself on why we stay in addiction, why we stay in domestic violence. What does it look like overcoming it? Just that cycle of self-education. That was huge for me. By educating myself of what I was doing to myself, what does this look like later on? Those kinds of scenarios. Educate yourself, reach out to the support that is there for you, and just be patient with yourself. There is options, and if you have to go out of town, if you have to go to a clinic that's not local, you have kids at home and you just can't go to rehab, which I hear that all the time. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, what can we do to get you to where you need to be? And realize that you're not abandoning yourself or your family by going to these places. You are actually showing up probably for the first time in a long time by making that horribly hard decision. But when you make that decision to go and you're able to come back and show all the growth that you yourself put into working to be a better you for your family, for your loved ones, for your kids, that fulfillment is just amazing. And you'll be so proud of yourself. And once you see that you can accomplish that, once you can see that you've met that goal, it's like a self-feeding fire. It's just, you just want to keep going. You just want to keep doing it. And if you don't, you reach out to the people that kind of feed it a little bit, and being willing to hear from, the things that are hard, because not always are we going to hear what we want to hear. Not always are our excuses going to be they're not going to be validating all the time. And that's okay. We learn that. It's a very hard process to go from a victim to a survivor of anything in life. And so just being patient.
And I would argue that the outside of the medical safety piece, because depending on what substance people are doing, there is absolutely a medical component of things that needs to be addressed. Whether you want to talk about, severe alcohol consumption where withdrawal has the potential of death. Same thing with benzodiazepines, opiates. Generally speaking, people don't die, but it's still a medical concern that needs to be addressed. That's one thing that, if I would contend that if you are in a small town or anything, that is one component that speaking with a physician, speaking with some kind of a medical professional is key.
Absolutely. Put that in, but 100%, if you're feeling any kind of symptoms of withdrawal, you're noticing that, don't cold turkey, go to the hospital because it's just not safe. That's exactly what happened with my son's dad. It's not safe at all. So,
and I have that in there because again, it's a duality here, right? It's like, listen, there is absolutely a component that you need to address with a professional. 100%. I don't care how tough you are. Go to the damn doctor. Past that.
But that's the thing too, is be willing to understand this, that it's not a bad thing. Yeah. And that's, I think, what a lot of people do in this rural area is, oh, well, there's nowhere I can just walk into. So I'm not going to go to the hospital and I'll figure it out. I'll be all right. I'll just quit on my own. No, go to the hospital, because even the hospital is going to be able to help you navigate what resources are going to work for your specific case and what are not. And safety is always important because there's nothing worse than a child not having a parent. And that's a very hard thing. And I can speak from experience on that. And so make sure that while you're going through the ruts of life in your substance use, to be mindful of the long-term consequences and the people that do struggle, that are involved in that by those choices that we do neglect to make sometimes.
And for all the people listening, this is one of those things that you can confirm with your doctor. But the most dangerous time when you talk about benzodiazepines or alcohol is going to be about 3 days-ish past your last drink. Once those things are all leaving your system, that is when the highest risk of seizures and happens. And I only say that because if people are trying to white knuckle it and thinking they're tough, they put so much emphasis on those first day or two not consuming the substance, when actually the greatest risk is going to be past that. And that's where you need to have a doctor involved.
Absolutely.
Well, Ronnie, I appreciate it. I could sit here going back and forth forever talking about all these different things. Again. Absolutely. I definitely would love to get you on sometime. Definitely. I want to have a kind of like a roundtable discussion one of these days where I bring in a bunch of different types of people.
I would love
maybe
to
I'll bring you on to
I'm all in.
be an advocate. All right, Ronnie. Thank you so much.